What's up, everybody? We're here with the Starving Podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Consistency Breeds Growth. Let's just say I have connections. They do customized nutrition, so head over to their website at consistencybreedsgrowth.com and use code CBG for 15% off nutrition coaching with some of the best coaches in the world. We're also brought to you by X Endurance, third-party tested supplementation. They have creatine, fish oil, which also includes vitamin D3, 2-for-1, various protein powders, lean protein powders. We trust in them because they are third-party tested, and we have a lot of athletes that get tested on a yearly basis, whether they qualify for a sanctional event or the CrossFit Games. So we need to make sure that third-party tested supplements are all what our athletes are intaking. So this is why we go with X Endurance. So if you're interested in buying X Endurance supplements, head over to the link in the show notes and get 10% off your first order. Also, we're brought to you by Palate. It's a genetic nutrition company. So if you've ever wondered if you have a lactose sensitivity, you might be deficient in a variety of different vitamins based off of your genes. You also may metabolize carbs very poorly, or you may metabolize carbs very well. All of these different things are in your genes, and your genes is a unit of heredity that basically defines, who you are. So you can get your DNA data from Palate and actually utilize that basically to, determine what your nutritional platform should be and what type of diet you might be following. And today we are going to be talking about CTE, okay? It's a neurodegenerative disease, and it's going to be me and Jordan again giving you guys a lot of different information about a preventative approach to this, what CTE is. So please enjoy. Thank you for listening.
It's science.
What up, Jordan?
Hey,
What up?
I like this new intro approach. I'm gonna see if I could work in like Rick Ross sounds or like WWE shout outs. I had that idea when I was like showering the other day. I was like, we gotta do some Rick Ross. Oh,
Yeah, we got to keep evolving. I agree.
Exactly.
Yeah, we're happy to have a few sponsors that provide us what we need to continue to podcast, and get good equipment and be able to reach more people. So all the sponsors, thank you so much. So today it's CTE, which is Chronic Traumatic Encephalopathy. It's a neurodegenerative disease. In light of the Aaron Hernandez documentary, obviously a lot of the social media community and just the population in general, especially with American sports, particularly football, people are very interested in learning more about this and how it might happen and what they can do to maybe prevent it. So I wanted to do a podcast about this, and what it means and how you can possibly use your nutrition to combat this neurodegenerative disease. So
I like it. All right, I think before we get into all that good stuff, I'll just mention briefly what we think chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Oh man, I already messed it up.
that's right. You
Yeah.
got
Oh
it, though.
man, just got that right out of the way.
Recovery.
Yeah. It's a neurodegenerative disease caused by repeated head injuries. Within some of the literature, they said that it's actually showed up since around the 1920s under a few different names. Being punch drunk was the sort of layman's terms for it, and they began to see this with, unsurprisingly, boxers that had long careers where they sustained pretty gruesome headshots. There's a few other names, but most of the literature seems to have acquiesced around this CTE term. And what else do I want to mention? Yeah, so severe hits, and also there's a nice little vein within some of the reviews too that it's not just linked to what are called concussive blows, so something that will actually present as a concussion. So we'll get into what a concussion will present as, but what are also called subconcussive blows. So let's say you, I don't know, fall down the stairs or you slip on some ice and you get up and you're kind of not really sure where you are. It's defined in the literature as an injury to your brain that may or may not present as a concussion or may not present to your like an ER physician or an EMT. So you might actually be concussed without knowing it. We won't get too much into the weeds about the mechanisms behind it. Maybe we can get into it in a different podcast, but it gets pretty heavy from there. Like I mentioned, we know it's caused by uh, mild traumatic brain injury. That would be the more diagnostic term for a concussion, but also this idea before with the subconcussive blows.
Yeah. So, yeah, as Jordan said, the mechanism is neurodegenerative. So, when we hit our heads, basically our brain will shake inside of our skull, and this repetitive shaking can eventually lead to CTE, and this is through subconcussive hits. So, just to define this a little bit, I mean, like in football, when you get hit, and it's most known in football, obviously, a movie came out a couple of years ago about the inception of, scientists learning about CTE and some of the repercussions of it for football players. But it's also very prominent in a lot of other sports as well, and we'll go through what those are. But basically, a concussion is a traumatic brain injury. It's a type of traumatic brain injury, and a subconcussive hit is essentially what people are linking the mechanism CTE for. So the issue with that is that a lot of these subconcussive hits are underreported, right? I mean, I think it's been estimated that between 1.6 and 3.8 million sports-related concussions occur per year in the United States, and that's just concussions. But the second impact syndrome or protracted symptoms of subconcussive hits are, causing long-term neurological impairment, neurometabolic and neurochemical cascades that initiate subsequent, damage, basically to the brain. And they believe that the current mechanism of this is, related to tau protein. So this is a protein in the brain, and they believe that this protein aggregates in a particular way around the brain that eventually causes, neural death. And if you continue to have subconcussive hits, you're going to experience more and more of this degradation. And to understand the mechanism is extremely important, especially for scientists when they're trying to develop not only medications, but nutrition and approaches and supplements and things that people can aid in preventing a disease of this type.
Yeah, and diagnostic tools as well. So I played rugby in college, and we always had protocols on field, and also when you were brought to the actual emergency room. I read one review. It wasn't really a review. It was it's like an editorial piece generated by the what's called the IRB, the International Rugby Board, and it was just a review of the plans that are in place for what they call the on the field concussion protocol. So obviously, if you get hit, concussed, and you lose consciousness, that's pretty easy to make that call and say, okay, that person should be playing. But like Justin mentioned, this repeated accumulation, this years upon years of these subconcussive blows, the science is really trying to learn how to take athletes off of the field immediately if there's a hit with suspect, and give them different treatment. Rather, the gold standard we used to use for the EMTs, and I doubt I'm sure it's used, but they would just flash a light into your eyes, and if your pupils were like a certain degree of reactivity, they would say, okay, we think you have one, but we're EMTs, let's bring you to the ER for a full workup. I forget the name of the test. I think Justin can help me out with this, but it's before any of our players would start playing the season, or even ideally before they would start playing any contact sports, is we would have like an IQ test, for lack of a better word, where they would be able to track your eye movements, your reaction times, those sort of things. And then if you suffered some sort of hard hit or a concussion at the worst case, you would take this test again, and that would give you some sort of metric as far as how far along in the recovery process that you were, like if you're recovering or if you were actually degrading still. So, yeah, it's still new, and it's definitely evolved since the last time I played a game, which was a few moons ago.
Yeah, this is the problem with CTE in general, that the therapies and detection methods are just not up to par for diagnosing the disease. And, there's a study, just to show how prominent this is, there was a study where 202 deceased football players, presumably with CTE, they had their brain autopsied, and it was shown that 177 of those players were, you know, neuropathologically diagnosed with CTE. So, yeah, it's
It's something that's
pretty
big.
prominent study. I would say, 87% of the brain samples that were donated to science.
Yeah, and the thing I think we forgot to mention before this is that as uh, as CT is being studied, the only definitive way at current, at least that I was able to find, was that CTE can only be diagnosed post-mortem, which means they take your brain out of your head during the autopsy. They'll do very thin slices and then investigate it under a microscope. And I believe there's different differential staining for the tau proteins. Um, it's something I'm not terribly familiar with, but that is the only way that we can officially rule whether somebody has CTE or not is post-mortem. So this makes the impetus to find or even diagnose concussions and subconcussive hits that more pressing, because it is only after some horrendous things can happen to your brain and this degeneration, and then ultimately in resulting in death, can we confirm this diagnosis.
So that's why it leaves a lot of people really wondering, do they have CTE or not? And there are other things coming out, other MRI tests, some other biomarkers that people are trying to use while obviously people are living, to, basically determine whether there is degradation in the presence of these other tau proteins in the brain. And, there's PET imaging and other types of imaging that people are also trying to use to determine, whether it exists. And then more research is even coming out with plasma or cerebral spinal fluid to diagnose the long-term diseases associated and processes of CTE. So these biomarkers will be a huge, pass-through for determining and helping people take an approach that, will stop the degradation of the brain. Maybe not reverse it, but at least stop it. Some of the symptoms to look out for, you know, that you might be experiencing: memory loss, confusion, impaired judgment, impulse control problems, aggression, depression, anxiety, suicidal, eventually, maybe progression to, dementia, forgetting things. These are the types of symptoms that you want to look out for, especially in young people. So I would say that's one of the things that you can do on your own to determine whether you might be experiencing the symptoms of CTE.
Yeah, a lot of this is standard symptoms for a lot of the other neurodegenerative diseases as well. And especially if you're experiencing any of these post post hit or post concussion, or even if you were not diagnosed with a concussion, you have a fall and you experience any of these acutely, especially, that's something to really watch out for and go get yourself checked out, because um, there's something kind of tied into this as well, this post-concussive syndrome, where you may have experienced a concussion and not known it, and then this double exposure, so you're getting hit again or you're falling again, and your brain is not completely healed, and then you have another concussion, and then this the memory loss, the confusion, and also the impulse control and the mood swings. If any of those are experienced acutely, you definitely want to go get checked out sooner rather than later.
Let's go through some of the people that might be at a higher risk than the average population when it comes to CTE. And the first, we sort of already hinted to it, but football players. So obviously, Aaron Hernandez experienced CTE, one of the worst cases of actually, looking at the brain after his death, and found that it was one of the most. There was more degradation in his brain than anyone else that they've ever looked at. So.
Yeah, it is pretty intense. I just finished that documentary and I was quite blown away. And I was a little upset that they relegated the topic of CTE and brain decay, more or less, to the last 10 minutes of the last installment of that. I really think that should have made a larger statement. But yeah, the most anything to do with high impacts or the risky sport. I mean, the sexiest version we think of is, like Justin mentioned, American football players, but there's also internationally rugby players and soccer players as well, especially when you're going up to, say, head a ball. In rugby, I mean, you can just get absolutely blasted. Um, I know when I was playing, they changed what's called the scrum cadence and the way that contact is initiated within the scrum. All my rugby players will appreciate what I'm talking about now, and the rest of you will probably just end up confused. But they actually they changed the way contact is initiated, and the idea with that, just instead of having, say, um, a foot between players when they initiated the scrum, they said, nope, we're not going to deal with that blunt force impact of 8 people and pushing into each other. You guys are going to be touching, and then you're going to start pushing one another. So that's huge. It's also big with military veterans. There's a fair amount of concussions reported, especially after the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq started opening up, when it wasn't. I mean, their concussions are always highly reported in battle areas too, but the rampant use of IEDs, the improvised explosive devices, were sending people flying through the air, landing on their heads, and all sorts of gruesome things.
Well, yeah, just the blast exposure from
Yeah,
that
yeah,
rattles the brain and causes these types of things. And to piggyback, WWE wrestlers and other amateur wrestlers experience this quite frequently. And Chris Benoit is a famous WWE wrestler who passed away, and you know it's very sad, but he also committed a double homicide right before his death, and they've attributed this completely to CTE. It was his wife and his I believe his daughter,
his son.
or
Yeah,
his son,
yeah, yeah.
Um, so this stuff is very real. It's very serious, and I've spoken with a WWE wrestler currently. Her name's Lacey Evans. She's actually my stepsister, but after speaking with her, she says that a lot of the education for them, it's they can do better. They can do better with educating people on what are some preventative ways, because when you get thrown down on the mat, obviously things like this, you experience some sort of shaking head trauma where the brain rattles around in the skull, and then eventually, if that happens enough, you can develop CTE. And then a big thing is that children and women are actually, they're less capable of protecting themselves to impact, and they have an increased risk of CTE as a result, because women and children's skulls are actually a lot thinner. This is something, this is why people say, or not people say, but the research is suggesting that, if you want to let your child play football or other combat sports, you want to let them develop before allowing that. And it could be that in the next 10 years or so, it's not going to be available to younger generation to start playing combat sports and football, and sparring and boxing is very huge. MMA,
Yep.
mixed martial arts, it's common everywhere in combat sports. And the one thing I wanted to mention, just because a lot of our audience are CrossFit athletes, it's not completely out of the question that CrossFit athletes could experience some symptoms of CTE really down the line. I mean, imagine 15 years doing kipping handstand push-ups, sort of your head hitting on the ground, and you're not in complete control because, you want the eccentric part of the movement to be quick, and you slam down on your head, you go back up. I mean, this is causing rattling of the brain. Same thing with the whiplash of ring muscle-ups and the constant whipping around doing butterfly pull-ups and chest to bar. So it's good to find preventative approaches out there. And, this is why I want to get into some of the nutrition now. If Jordan is good with that.
Yeah, I think we're good. I mean, I'll rip on the NFL and the rugby tackling a little bit later on in the episode. We don't have to do it now. Well, but that's definitely something I'm gonna get heated about. We'll go on my rants
Yeah.
later. Let's do the nutrition
Well,
part.
the thing about that, the big thing is like the equipment is not helping.
You're a missile.
Like, yeah, it's not helping. The better helmets and it's not helping this. Right,
No.
right. It's subconcussive hits. It's not two guys crashing into each other and they have a hematoma on their skull.
It's
It's
a
not, it's,
Yeah, it's like it's the form tackling that's taught in the NFL now. Now that we've had NFL players going and killing people and stuff like that, or even not even that, but just having problems where they're clearly experiencing something wrong with their head, whether it be depression that can be tied to any number of things. But the way that they are teaching tackling now, I know there's a heads up program where they're teaching students in the game to look up as they're making the tackle. But you can't have that education program be there, then also glorify they're basically headshots that you see in every football game of people leading with the crown of the helmet trying to kill the other person. And not to say this doesn't happen in rugby or something else, but in rugby, if you lead a tackle with your head, you're thrown out. There's absolutely it's in the formation of the game back in the 1800s. Rugby, you just get blown up because you're tackling with your hips. So you can hit somebody on the knees, they'll blow out a knee, but your head just has that huge whiplash effect that Justin mentioned, and then you're still getting knocked out. So it's a, yeah, it's rampant. And yeah, let's do nutrition now. It's a little happier.
yeah, it is a little bit happier. It's a deep podcast, but yeah, there's a risk with every sport, right?
Hmm.
And the college players get it the worst, right? Because
Oh,
they're not even getting paid, and they
they don't
got
get paid, and
people.
yeah, they're supposed to be grateful. It's like, oh, we're gonna throw a scholarship at you. Yeah, at what cost? There's 40 people on the team that you just, yeah, that's it.
That's another
That's another
podcast.
podcast, man.
Yeah, but yeah, the nutrition stuff. Let's go ahead and get into it. So
Let's
there
do
are a
it.
couple of supplements that I want to go over, and obviously, staying away. It's been shown that at least overarchingly, diet-wise, um, with essentially neurodegenerative based diseases, that diets that are low in saturated fat, and saturated fat's not inherently bad. It's been shown in some studies that neuroplasticity is sort of hindered and stuff like that in diets that are really high in the presence of saturated fat. So you don't want to have too much saturated. So this is your butter and your egg yolks and stuff like that. But other than that, the only other evidence out there that we really seen for a specific type of diet is keto. And keto actually, the mechanism of this, well, it was developed in general for, patients that were experiencing seizures. It was supposed to help that. And it's still sort of around in the literature, whether it's the processed carbohydrates that are causing this, and that, lower amounts of carbohydrates are okay. But regardless, it seems that some of these symptoms of seizures are mediated with a keto approach. So that's obviously been studied for neurological disease such as CTE, and it's been shown to have some benefit. And it's because when you really get your brain rattled like that, your glucose metabolism is impaired. So basically, your body doesn't process carbohydrates, so the brain doesn't get fed, to put in layman terms. So if your body starts to learn how to run on fat and you become fat adapted, this isn't a problem. And this is what one of the biggest functions of the keto diet really is. So
Yeah.
that's what I would say about a general nutritional approach. But one supplement that's been found with MRI imaging to be very low and reduced in the brain after impact, whether from a traumatic brain injury or constant hits, is creatine. And a lot of creatine as a performance-based supplement, especially for strength athletes. So what creatine does, it actually donates a phosphate group in the body and can actually help with a lot of lifting athletes, and primarily aids strength-based athletes, not endurance-based athletes for the most part. So this is a supplement that is good to take because there are lower levels of it in the brain after some of these subconcussive and concussive hits, and you should take it, not only from food. So it's present in fish and in meat. Almost said feet. It's present in feet.
And yes,
It's
that
present
is
in
meat
meat
too.
and
So
fish. Yeah, it's present in meat and fish, but some of it gets cooked down. So you're going to want to supplement with this. X Endurance actually has a great creatine monohydrate that you can get. It's relatively cheap. It's not an expensive supplement. and you can get 10% off. So the link will be in our bio for that if you're interested.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, so this is the first supplement I would say that I would definitely research into and be on it if you're not already on it. And if you have questions about loading it properly, contact one of our CBG coaches and they can help you with that for free of charge, just to give you some information about how to do it properly. So the next supplement is actually curcumin. You can buy this at the grocery store. This is basically a bioactive component of a spice herb turmeric, which is a root, and you can essentially, a lot of people use it for its medicinal properties as an antioxidant and anti-inflammatory. But actually, there are a lot of reactive oxygen species. So, especially in the presence of diets that are high in polyunsaturated fatty acids, the brain is particularly susceptible to perioxidation, lipid oxidation in the brain. And one way to combat that is to take an antioxidant. So curcumin, which is the active ingredient in turmeric, is actually an antioxidant. Its bioavailability is really low, so you're going to want to take like a lot of it. Like I would put it on all of your foods, but people have even supplemented tons of, like 4 to 5 grams of it a day, and they've done biomarkers and show that not a lot of it's around in the body. So you're going to want to supplement with a lot of it, and there's studies still ongoing about how to increase the bioavailability by adding stuff to the curcumin or turmeric that you're using. But either way, it's a good preventative way to avoid CTE, protect the brain.
Yeah, turmeric is a great one. It's used within for all of our cooking listeners out there. It's used within the Indian spice palette, the Ayurvedic herbs. Jeez, can't talk today. But also, you can boost some of the bioavailability of the compounds in turmeric if you blast it with black pepper. So if you're making, when I make rice, I'll put a ton of turmeric in there, but also like some 5, 10, 15 grinds of fresh black pepper, and those two things together just boost the bioavailability of all that good and groovy stuff in the turmeric. So, booyah.
I'm impressed, Jordan. I didn't know you were that smart, dude.
I just make this up most of the time. So, yeah,
Yeah. I heard that somewhere, but I totally forgot about it. So
it's
yeah,
good
I
stuff.
guess,
We're here
yeah,
for all your
absolutely.
cooking needs. Obviously, we'll get that started soon.
Um,
Fish oil too, right?
yeah. So omega-3 fatty acids. It's a type of hexanoic acid called DHA, and it's present in fish oil. And one of the consequences, pathological consequences of traumatic brain injury is that there is a reduction in the quantity of DHA following injury. And there have been, a couple of studies on this.
Mm-hmm.
So further deficiency of brain DHA induced by dietary restriction heightens the response to TBI and, causes greater breakdown of, neuronal cytoskeleton proteins. So you're going to want to supplement with these long chain omega fatty acids, and you can get this with a fish oil supplement. Big thing about the fish oil supplement: if your fish oil is really rancid, doesn't smell good, it's not good anymore. Throw it out. It's trash. And this happens with a lot of the fish oils on the market currently. They sit on a shelf for so long. Get you a quality one that you can trust. So a lot of them from Nordic Arctic
Yeah.
is a good brand, and also X Endurance has one that also has it has a vitamin D3 in it.
That one's
So if you're not
legit.
getting, yeah,
Yeah,
that's the one that you probably want to get.
it's like all DHA
Um,
and EPA. They have it all specced out too. I think we should do a podcast just on fish oil, but like most of the daily recommended allowances, if you're training or you're undergoing let's say you're writing a dissertation like Crazy Pants is, then you could basically just ignore whatever dosing information they tell you on the package because you need just was it like 3 to 5 grams of DHA or EPA a day to even have a therapeutic response out of it, and most of the daily recommendations will tell you on the pill bottles like take one pill, and it's like you're getting 250 milligrams of like one of those, and you're like no, you gotta supplement like crazy and eat fish too. Eating fish is better,
yeah,
but
eating fish is also good. Yep.
yeah. Little,
Yeah.
I'm full of rants today. I can't help it. It's late
That's
here.
all good.
Yeah.
The other thing, when your fish oil comes in, make sure that you put it in a fridge. So these, like I said, these do oxidize over time. They become rancid, just like other unsaturated sources of fat. So put them in the fridge and, take as prescribed on the bottle. But ideally, you wanna get in a particular milligram amount that's gonna, help with preventing um, these types of diseases. And it's also really good for heart health. There are a decent amount of studies out there. And I
Hmm.
would say omega-3 fatty acids are probably the most understood and studied for the prevention of traumatic brain injuries and
Sure.
CTE. Out of all the supplements that I've mentioned, the creatine and the curcumin, which is in turmeric. So I would definitely invest in a good fish oil supplement and keep it in the freezer or the fridge and take it daily.
Fridge is gonna
Definitely
make
take
it.
it daily.
Yeah, fridge is gonna make it taste less weird too. If you're afraid of like, oh, it's gonna taste like fish. No, put it in the fridge. When something's cold, it dulls your senses. Just dropping knowledge bombs everywhere today.
Dropping it.
Just
The,
dropping
the
it.
the big thing too, the one I have from X Endurance, people say like when they burp up like, a fishy kind of like taste. The one from X Endurance doesn't do that to me at all. It's one of the only ones I found that doesn't do that.
Mm.
So,
Oh yeah.
get your fish oil, especially if you're a young athlete playing football. We've had a lot of messages through Consistency Breeds Growth about what people can be doing, really help with this and prevent it because it isn't reversible at this point. I don't think it's very hard to imagine that it will be. So
You got one brain, man. If that thing goes, nothing else
that's
matters.
it.
That's it. That's it.
That's it. Yeah, and just another note here, just for like military veterans and stuff, there's a lot of links now to like CTE and PTSD.
Yep.
So some of the things that they're experiencing there, it's all over the place. And I think there was a wave of informative information a couple of years ago about this, and I think the Aaron Hernandez documentary really brought it back. And nutrition can be a huge part in preventing this. And I mean, just other nutritional protocols you might want to think about following. You want to make sure you have a diet heavy in, plant anti-inflammatories, ginger, choline. We already mentioned turmeric, and other micros from your vegetables such as magnesium, zinc. We already talked about omega-3s, but all these types of supplements are going to be extremely important. And there's other neurofeedback mechanisms that you can possibly do to help with this. So like anything that increases breathing. So like breathing exercises, meditation, sound healing, yoga, cold light, laser therapy. All of these things, there are a few studies on each showing basically, it allows more oxygenated blood to the brain, which is good for the brain, right? If you're breathing appropriately, you learn how to breathe properly. There's also inversion techniques. Those you have an inversion table to actually deload the spine. This actually allows, based on gravity, your more blood to get to your brain, right? Because it's going to travel downward. So if you're inverted, this allows more oxygenated blood to the brain. So it's things like this that are also mechanistically of an advantage for neurological disease in general. There's ongoing research about how to detect this in young adults, especially young athletes. A diet heavy in plants and a lot of micronutrients. Those three supplements we talked about: omega-3 fatty acids, curcumin, creatine, and possibly the keto diet to get fat adapted, or a fasting methodology to get fat adapted,
Yeah.
which is going to help the brain, be able to use other substrates when glucose metabolism is impaired. And there are also supplements out there called exogenous ketones. So this is where, your body, when it becomes fat adapted, it starts to make byproducts called ketones in the body. So when you do a keto diet for long enough, you start to make ketones. And you can actually, instead of doing that, what's some people actually, they take exogenous ketones. By exogenous, I mean it's not in the body. They take a supplement that provides ketones to the body, and this can also be a sort of a replacement to doing a keto type diet. All these things considered, there are a lot of sad stories out there, but unfortunately, based on the competitive nature of sports and combat sports in general that people love so much, CTE is continuously a problem. And if there's any way to mediate that, we want to be of help. So this is why we did this podcast, and this is why we're providing sort of a nutritional preventative approach for some people. So if you have questions, please let us know. Reach out to the Starving Podcast at gmail.com or Consistency Breeds Growth.
Yeah.
That's it, guys. So thank you so much for listening. We'll be back on with another segment. Our next podcast is likely going to be something related to cheaters in CrossFit. So there's a lot of people out there that are taking, substances that are banned, and we want to, be able to talk about some of these cases and why we think that this is occurring and what the testing people are doing about the no tolerance policy in CrossFit. So stay tuned for that, guys. If you have any questions about CTE, please let us know. And thank you for listening to the Starving Podcast.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.